A few months ago, I interviewed for the role of front-end developer at an Indian unicorn, Unacademy. The interview was completely based on JavaScript and React.js questions. So that's why in today's video, I'm gonna discuss the whole process on how I got the interview and all of the questions that were involved in the interview process. So I contacted one of the hiring managers on Twitter and provided him with all of the relevant stuff while cold contacting, like my resume, portfolio, and my deployed projects along with the source code links, and that is how I got this opportunity. The recruiter got on a call with me the same day and he evaluated my projects and resume etc. and decided to move forward with my application. He explained me about the whole interview process, including the number of rounds and what topics they are going to be. So this interview process had 4 rounds. First 2 being on JavaScript, the third one on React.js, and the fourth one was a HR or cultural round. So let's go on and discuss the questions from the first round, which was more of a screening round. So I've opened VS Code over here with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript file. So when we go on and run this, you're gonna see that you get a very important message over here. Now let's go back to our JavaScript files and start with our first question. So the first question was, what is the difference between map and forEach? So to explain this, we're gonna take an array with, let's say, 2, 5, 3, 4, some random values. Now, first of all, what are map and forEach? These both are array functions to loop through the items of the array. So if I go on and say arr.map, and we're gonna provide a callback over here. So just like this. And now we can perform any operation on this array. So let's say return AR plus 2. So what this will do is it's gonna return the whole array with 2 added to each item of the array. It's not going to modify the original array. Whereas if we do this for each, this performs like a normal for loop, but this doesn't return anything just like map does. So if I go on and say const map result and const for each result, and go on and console log both of these. Now let's go to our browser and open the console. So we get an array in the result of the map. So it returned us the array, but didn't modify the original array. So it returned us a new array with all of the items having a +2, but the forEach didn't return us anything. So both of these functions have a different use case. Let's say if we want to modify this array. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take the index and I'll say of I. Yes. So what this will do is it will modify the original array. So let's say I'm gonna add 3 to it, and now I'll console log this array. This was the array from the map, and this was the modified array, which was ARR, our original array. Now this was the first difference. Now the second difference is that you can chain stuff on map. So I can say dot and something. We can let's say if we want to do dot filter and do some operation inside of this filter, so we can do that with map. But in forEach, since it doesn't return any array, we cannot chain other methods after it. So these two were the difference that came to my mind at that time. So obviously there can be more differences as well. If you know any other differences between map and forEach, let others know in the comments below. Alright, so the next question was the difference between null and undefined. So how I gave an answer for this is, first of all, I told the interviewer that null is an actual value, but undefined means that the variable is declared, but it's not initialized yet. So let me show you. So if we go on and console log type of null, you're gonna see that the type of null is object. But if we do the same thing with the undefined, the type of undefined is undefined, because this is not an actual value. So if we go to the browser, type of is not defined. Oops. Type of, just like that. Yeah. You see, the type of null is object and type of undefined is undefined. Now, a lot of people get confused between undefined and not defined. So let me show you what that means. So if I go on and let's say let a, and I declared it just like this, and let me remove both of these. And I'm gonna console log a. So you'll see that I get undefined inside of it. Just like this, because it has been declared, but the value is not initialized. But we can go on and initialize it with a value, which can be null. So null can be an actual value, unlike undefined. So yep, you see, we get null over here. But if we don't declare a at all, then this will be not defined. Yep, you see, a is not defined. Now, the follow-up question for this was the interviewer gave me these two things. So he said null equals undefined, null triple equals undefined. And he asked me to tell the output for both of these statements. So what do you think is going to be the output for this one? So the first statement is going to be true, and the second one will be false. Do you know the reason why? Because double equals just compares both of these entities without matching their types. But the triple equals or the strict equality compares the types of both of these entities as well. So this was more of a question related to double equals and triple equals. So yeah, now you know the answer. The third question was to explain the event delegation. So first of all, let's understand what event delegation is. So let's say if we have an e-commerce site with a bunch of products listed on it, and we want to perform an event when we click on a particular product. So we are not going to obviously add the event listener on all of these products, right? On each item of the list, because that will fill our web page completely with these events and it's going to take a lot of memory. So what event delegation does is we provide the event listener to the parent and access the child elements with the help of that event. So let's go on and find out in the code. I'm going to go to the index.html. And below this, below the h1, I'm going to add a simple div with ID of products, and I'm going to add a bunch of list items inside of it. And let's see if this is rendered or not. Yep, this is rendered. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go inside the script.js file, and I'm going to say document dot query selector, and I'm going to select this products. And then we're going to have an event listener of click event and a callback after it. Just like that, we're going to take an event from inside of it, and let's just console log this event and see what do we get when we click on it. Oops, that's my bad. I put the script tag over here. I should have put the script tag right over here. So now, yep, it's cleared. Anyway, so if we click on any of these items, you're going to see that we get this pointer event object, and inside of it, target, and inside of the target, we're going to have a tag name. Yep, tag name of li. So now we can target the li items inside of it. And also you can see we get this text content of shirt since we click on this shirt list item. Right below this, I'm going to say if event dot target dot tag name is equals to li triple equals, window dot location dot href. Href will have this path, so hash and let's say the name of the clicked product. So event dot target dot id. Let's see. Now when we click on this, this is going to route us to that page, or like at least have the product name inside of the URL. So if you click on this, yep, you see we get this hash wallet. So this is what event delegation is. Without adding event listener to each specific list item, we just added it to the parent and we are using it to click the other list items. Now the next question that the interviewer asked me was, he provided me with this array and he asked me to flatten the array. So what does flattening an array means? So when we flatten the array, it's gonna look something like this without these nested array inside of it. So first of all, he asked me to flatten the array just one level. So they can be multiple levels, right? So we can have an array inside of another array, so stuff like this. So he asked me to flatten this to just one level. So what I did was, I simply let flattened, and I added an empty array dot concat and just spread this array inside of it. So ARR. And what this will do is it's gonna spread this array and then concat it with this empty array, which will result in one level of flattening. So if we go on and console log this, and check. You're gonna see we get a flattened array, but this is not flattened obviously because this was nested inside of this one. So it's fair. It worked as expected. But then interviewer asked me to write the custom Array.flat method. So if you don't know, there is a method inside of JavaScript called Array.flat. So if you go on and say, let me remove this, arr.flat, and now you can see in the browser, it flattened the complete array. Okay, so we are supposed to give this depth as well. So let's say we want to flatten this array to the 2 levels, because obviously there are only 2 levels inside of this. So if I put 2 over here, yep, you see the whole array has been flattened. So we are supposed to write a custom flat function for our array. So let's remove this for now and add a function called custom flat. This takes an array and depth, which by default will be 1. Now inside of this, to store the result, we're gonna have a result array, an empty result array, and inside of that I'm gonna forEach through this. Now here I'm gonna check if the provided item is an array or not. So I'm gonna say array dot is array. So this checks if the provided item is array or not basically. And I'm gonna check if the depth still remains, if we are supposed to go further inside of this array. So I'm gonna check if depth is more than 0. So I'm gonna explain, don't worry. This will actually be a recursion technique. So we're gonna call this custom flat again inside of it. So what we'll do over here is I'm gonna say result dot push whatever we get from this custom flat, and we're gonna provide it this remaining array. I'll explain this again, don't worry. And we're gonna remove the depth by 1. Otherwise, if this is not an array, then obviously this is going to be a single number. So this has already been flattened, right? So I'm gonna say else result dot push AR. And finally, below this, I'm gonna return result. Okay, so let's see what's going on over here. When we go on and console log custom flat, and we provide it with our array and depth, let's say 2, and see if this works or not. Yep, this is working as expected. If I give this 1, or let's say if we don't give the depth, yep, it flattened it by 1 level. Okay, so let's see what's going on over here. We have a result array which is empty. Inside this, we are mapping through the complete array, that is this array right here. So first of all, it's going to encounter one array. So it's going to check if this is an array. Yep, it's an array. And is depth more than 0? Yep, by default it was 1 if we haven't provided depth. So it was more than 0. Yep, that's fine. So we went in and did result.push. Now it went again inside of it, and this time array is this one. This is the array, and depth is 0 this time. Right, so now it went again inside of over here, array.forEach, and it mapped through this 1 and 2. So first of all it was 1. So it checked if this is an array. No, this is not an array. So it went over here, else result.push arr. So it pushed 1 into the into this array. So 1, then comma. Again it looped through this item 2. It was not an array again. So it pushed it again inside of it. So 2. So it returned this complete object. Now obviously this array is emptied, so it's going to return this result. So it returned this 1, 2, and we spread it inside of result.push. So this result was the parent result, the original result where we were adding our answer. So it got added 1, 2. Now then again, this is going to be the same case with 3, 4, and it's going to add 3, 4 inside of it. So similarly, it's going to go much deeper as it encounters more and more arrays and flattens the complete array until the job is done. So yeah, I hope I was clear enough to explain this custom flat function. So let's move on to our next question. So next, interviewer asked me to show him all of my projects. So I already had shared my portfolio with him. So I'm going to go to my portfolio over here, which is this one. Looks good, isn't it? The tutorial for this portfolio site is coming soon on our channel. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel with bell notifications turned on. So I showed him all the projects one by one, and he liked this project a lot, the chat app with MERN stack. The tutorial for which I've already created on my channel, so you can click the link in the description or I button above to learn how you can also build this project with MERN stack. So he asked questions like, why did you use a particular tech stack? Why did you use this database and this front-end technology and stuff like that? And that was it for round 1. So for the first question of round 2, the interviewer asked me the difference between var, let and const keywords. So first thing that I could think of was that var is functional scoped and let and const are block scoped. So what does that mean? Let's go and find out. So if I create a block over here, and let's have a var equals, let's say hello. And if I try to console log it, to check if the scope belongs outside of this block or not. So yep, we get this hello over here. But what if we change this to let? It says A is not defined. But what if we change it to const? It's again going to say that A is not defined. It's because the scope of these const and let keywords is only inside of these two curly braces. So if I, let's say, move this inside of over here, yep, we get this hello. But that is not the case with var. Now the next difference that I came up with was related to declaration. So if I remove this and let's say write var a equals 5. And now if I go on and say var a again equals 10, then that's completely fine. It's not going to give us any error. But if we write let equals a and we try to redeclare that, we're gonna get this error that identifier a has already been declared. And the same case is with const as well. Yep, identifier a has been already declared. But what about initialization? Let's check. Let's find out. So we've already seen that var obviously can be initialized twice. So that's not a problem. But if we make this let, and let me remove let from over here since it cannot be declared twice. So can let be initialized again? Let's see. Yes, it can be initialized. It doesn't give us any error. But what about const? Assignment to a constant variable. This gives us an error. So const cannot be reinitialized. It cannot be redeclared or reinitialized, but let can be reinitialized. Now, one more major difference is that if we remove this value from here and let's say var a, then it can be declared without adding a value inside of a, right? Yep, we can do that. Can we do that with let? Yep, we can do that as well. But can we do that with const? It gives us an error. Missing initializer in the const declaration. So you cannot declare const like this. You have to provide a value to it. So no error now. The second question for round 2 was an output based question on setTimeout. So the interviewer provided me with this code snippet and obviously we're gonna run this over here. So he asked me what is going to be the output for this. So let's think about it. Most people will think that since we are console logging over here, we are running a loop over here, for loop, and we are console logging each of these values inside of over here after 1 second each. So most people will think that the output is going to be this 0, 1, 2. Is it? Let's find out. It is 3 times. Let's refresh the page. So 3, 3 and 3 after 1 second each. So why is this happening? This is because of var. So what var does is, we just discussed in our previous question. So var doesn't have a block scoped. Var has a function scoped. So what's happening over here is, first time this runs, var's value is 0. But this is not going to be printed right away because setTimeout only runs after the complete code has ran successfully. Right, so this is not going to run. So we have a reference to that I variable in our memory. So we have a reference over here, let's say. Okay, then again, the I is 1. Then we again have a reference to the I variable, just like that. And then I is 2. Then we again have a reference to I variable. And then the third time, the value of I is 3, but if we obviously we won't go inside of over here since it says that I has to be less than 3. So we're not going to run inside of it. We come out of this loop and then setTimeout has finished its time, and now our JS engine is going to print all of these values. So last time the JS engine encountered the value of I, it was 3. Now here JS engine is referring to the current value of I. So the current value of I was 3. So it's gonna print 3, 3, and 3. Just like that. Now what's the solution for this? You may have guessed it right. The solution for this is using let instead of where. Let's see the output. 0, 1, 2. Yes. So what's happening over here is let is block scoped. So first of all, let's value was 0. So it has the completely different scope. So in this scope, the value of I was 0. So it's gonna print it later on. Then again, the second value of I was 1. So again, after the complete code has ran successfully, it's going to look into the scope of that I variable. And when it looks into all the 3 scopes, it's going to find 0, 1, and 2. So this is the logic behind this question. So actually this was the follow-up question that the interviewer asked. I just explained it to you in one go. So these were 2 different questions that the interviewer asked. Interviewer asked first to tell him the output of the first with where. And then he asked me how we can print 0, 1, 2. So then I went on and explained him with let. So this was the question. But few of the interviewers extend this question even more. They're gonna say you're not allowed to use let. You're gonna have to use where instead of let, and you have to print 0, 1, 2. You have to give this output. How are we gonna do that? So this is a task for you all. I'm gonna give you a small hint. It's gonna use closures.
All right, pause. If you're not yet following me on Twitter, go to twitter.com/Piyush_Eon or click the link in the description down below and hit that follow button right now. I'm waiting for you. I'm still waiting. Okay, fine. Let's continue with the video.
Now the third question was to explain call, apply, and bind. So with call, apply, and bind methods, you can basically manipulate the context for a particular function. So let me go on and show you. So I went ahead and created this object over here, where person, which contains a name variable and a function called hello, which is console logging this dot name, says hello, and thing which will be provided inside of this function. So let's go on and just let's invoke this function person.hello, and I'm gonna, let's say, provide a world over here. Let's see what do we get. We get roadside coder says hello world. Yep, that's fair enough because this keyword is pointing to this person object over here. Now let's see how call works, but before that I'm gonna create another object over here with name Piyush Agarwal. So now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna say hello.call, and I'm going to provide this object. So what call does is call takes an object which is going to become the context for this particular function, and for the other parameters it takes the arguments that this function is going to take. So I've provided the world over here. So now this should print this name instead of this name. Let's see. Yep, that's perfectly fine. Now how is the apply different from call? So there's a very small difference. So we can say apply, and instead of providing params like this, we just need to provide them inside of the array. And now over here this is going to be provided to this thing over here, and let's see what do we get. Yep, this is what we were expecting. Now what does bind do? So bind doesn't take this second param. It just takes a context and it returns us a completely new function with this context. So I'm gonna say const new person, and now this can be invoked just like this. And you're gonna see, oh, okay, we didn't provide it the argument which was this, so we can say world. Yep, that's what you were expecting. Yep, so this was the difference between call, apply, and bind. Now the next question was on infinite currying. So if you have seen my previous video on this front-end interview series, I was asked the same question in the Cast24 interview. So you can go ahead and watch that video. There I've explained this question in a more in-depth way. So link will be in the description or I button above. So you can go and watch that video. Now for the fifth function, the interviewer gave me these 3 functions right here. And he told me to write a compose method, basically a polyfill for the compose method, which will evaluate all of these 3 functions. So if you don't know what compose is, basically what compose does is, let's say if I write const evaluate, there's going to be a compose function, which is going to take all of these functions right here. So let's say add 5, subtract 2, multiply 4. So it took all of these 3 functions, and then it's going to return another function which will take an initial value. So I'm gonna console log evaluate, and it's gonna take initial value, let's say 5. So what this is going to do is, it's gonna take 5, and first of all it's gonna send 5 to this multiply 4. So 5 into 4 is 20. Now the result of this function is going to be sent to this subtract 2. So 20 minus 2 is going to be 18, and the result of this, that is 18, is going to be sent to add 5, which is going to be 23 over here, and then it's going to be returned to us here, and we are going to console log 23. So this is the function that we are supposed to write over here. So let's see how we can do that. So I'm gonna comment this out for now, and I'll say const compose. So now what's the first thing that we are supposed to do? We're supposed to take all of these functions, right? So all of these functions. So I'm just gonna, we don't know how many functions the user is going to supply us. So I'm just gonna say functions. Yep. So this is going to take the array of all of these functions. Now inside of it, I'm going to return another function, and this will take arguments for that function, for these functions. And now inside of this is going to be the main logic of this compose. We're gonna take all of these functions, and we're going to reduce right. So there are 2 types of such functions. One is compose and the other is pipe. So what pipe does is, pipe evaluates from left to right, but compose evaluates from right to left. So I'm going to say functions dot reduce right. So we're going to reduce it from right to left. So it's going to take 2 things. First is going to be the argument, which was received from the previous function, and a function, the actual current function. And I'm gonna say function and provide that argument to that function, and it's going to have an initial value which will be args. So if you can see, we have provided an initial value over here, so this is going to be args, just like that. I believe this should work. Let's see. This should give us 23. We're getting undefined. Why is that? Oh, it's because we're supposed to return over here. Yep. Let's see. Yeah, we get 23 as an output. So yeah, this is what the compose function is. This is a really important interview question, and I would recommend you to go and try the pipe as well. Now the 6th and the last question for this round was to implement Promise.all. Now what is Promise.all? Let's see. So before explaining Promise.all, I'm going to create a few promises. Let's say first is going to be show text, which will show the text after a given number of time. And let's just implement this now. So Promise.all takes a bunch of promises. So first of all, let's say show text, and this is going to take a text like hello, and a time, which I'm gonna say, let's say 1 second. Now the second promise that I'm gonna give is promise.resolve, resolve, and let's say hi. Oh, also this is going to be an array. Oops. Both of these promises are going to be an array. It takes an array of promises, and then we're gonna add dot then. Let's say value and whatever the value that we get. So what this basically does is it takes a bunch of promises and it resolves all of them. If all of them are resolved, it's gonna return an array with all of the resolved result. So in this case, we are going to get hello and hi. Yep, just like this. So it waited. So let me show you. So if I refresh the page, it's gonna wait for all of the promises to get completed. So it waited 1 second for this to get completed, and then it printed both of these promises together. But what if one of these promises fail? So I'm gonna say promise.reject by. Then what's gonna happen? Then all of these promises are going to fail. If any one of these promises fails, the complete promise.all is going to get failed. So let's create the polyfill for this. I'm gonna create a function my promise all, and it's gonna take a bunch of promises as the arguments. Inside this, I'm gonna have a result array, which is going to be empty, which will contain the result for all of these promises at the end. Now I'm gonna return a new promise, which will take resolve and reject, just like always. And now inside this, I'm gonna for each through all of these promises. So promises, the promises that we receive over here, promises dot for each. And now for each promise, so I'm gonna take a single promise over here along with the index. I'm gonna do some things. So I'm gonna resolve each of the promises. So promise dot then, and I'm gonna take the result. And if this gets successfully resolved, I'm gonna add the result to our result array. So result.push is going to be, let me rename this to res. I think that's better. So res, I'm gonna add this to our result array. And now I'm gonna check if all of these promises are resolved now. So I'll say if index is equals to promises dot length minus 1. Oops, length minus 1. So if this is all of the promises are resolved, so I'm gonna resolve the complete thing. So resolve, whoops, resolve the result, just like that. But if any one of these have failed, I'm gonna check. So this was dot then, and after this is going to be dot catch. If any one of these promises have failed, then I'm gonna instantly fail it, and I'm gonna reject with the error, just like that. I believe this should be it. Let's find out. I'm gonna provide it with my promise all, and let's see if this works or not. So this should fail with, yep, as expected, it should fail. But what if we remove this failing condition? This should give us hello and hi. Yep, we get both of these result in our array. So yeah, that was what the interviewer was expecting from me. And this concludes our round 2 of the interview process. So the third round was on React.js. So the first question for this round was to explain the lifecycle methods in React.js, both by using class components and functional components. So I went on to explain it with the class component first. So let me remove this function right here. And I'm gonna add a class app extends react.component. And inside of this class, I'm gonna have, let's say, a render. So now the first lifecycle method is component did mount. So what does component did mount do? So let me write it, component did mount. And component did mount basically runs when our app is rendered for the first time, or when our component is rendered for the first time. So I'm gonna console log over here. Component did mount, oops. Component did mount runs. So let's see. Let's open the console. And you can see the component did mount runs for the first time. So basically we use component did mount for use cases like when we want to fetch the data from an API, or let's say when we're supposed to provide some initial value to some state and stuff like that. Then there is component did update. So for that, I'm gonna create another component over here. So I'll create a new directory called components. And inside of it, I'm going to create a new file called, let's say, counter.js. And this counter is going to have this simple class component with a number prop that I'm going to send to it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a local state. So state, and this will have a num of 0 state. When we click on this button, it should increment this state. Let me first of all import that component over here. So I'm gonna add some fragments, and inside of it, I'm gonna import the counter, just like that. And it's gonna take this num. So this counter had which prop? Number prop. So I'm gonna provide number to be this dot state dot num. So it's obviously 0 times right now. When we click on this button, it should increment this. So let me create a handle click function for this. So what this handle click will do, this will set our state to +1. So let me invoke this real quick over here. So on click, this dot handle click dot bind this. So this should work. Let's try it out. Yep, this is working. Cool. Now let me demonstrate component did update. So if I go inside this counter, so component did update takes a few things. First will be previous props and previous state, so that we can compare our new state with the previous state or new props with the previous props. So I'm sending this number over here, right? I'm going to say whenever this number changes, that is whenever this prop gets updated, do something. Basically do a console log or something like that. So I'm going to say if previous props dot number is not equals to the current, that is this dot props dot number. Then let's console log component did update runs. So yeah, let's see. If we refresh our app, component did mount runs. Okay, fine. If we click on increment, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to bring this in this component itself so that you can see the life cycle of this component. Yeah, so I'm going to remove this component now. Now notice, when I render this component, let me clear this console. When I render this component, it's going to render component did mount runs. But whenever the prop changes, you're going to see component did update runs every single time. So this is what component did update does whenever the props gets updated or state gets updated. Now there's a third lifecycle method, which is component will unmount. So component will unmount. So this will basically run when the component is removed from our app, or when it's unmounted. So this kind of runs. Okay, cool. So when we do anything, this doesn't run at all. But when we remove this component, you're gonna see component will unmount runs. Yep. So these three were the lifecycle method. Obviously there are more lifecycle methods, but these three are the major lifecycle methods in React. These basically define the complete lifecycle of a particular component, from mounting to updating to getting unmounted. Okay. So now let's see how we can implement this by using functional component. So I'm gonna go inside of over here. I'm gonna remove this counter class, and I'll just say function counter, and basically create a simple functional component, and this takes a number prop, and I'm going to return of number. Yes, this was not standardization. Cool. So whoop, my bad. So this is what a simple functional component is. If we go and increment this, yep, it runs. So how do we use lifecycle methods inside of it? So to use lifecycle methods inside of a functional component, we use a hook called useEffect. So useEffect takes a callback and has an array of dependencies. So first of all, when we write anything inside of this with the array of dependency as empty, component is mounted. Yeah, let's clear this console and mount this component again. So if I remove this and mount this again, you can see component is mounted. It's going to be run just one single time because the array of dependency is empty. We click on increment, nothing happens. Cool. So how do we update this? If we write anything inside of over here, so let's say if we write number inside of over here, whenever the value of number changes, this is going to run. So I'm just going to say component is updated. Let's see. Yep, you can see the updated values going up. Number of times it's getting updated, it's going up. Yep, that's what we were expecting. So this is component did update with functional component. Now how do we implement component will unmount with functional components? So for unmounting, we just say return, and we return an empty function with the Let's have a console log here. This is unmounted. Let's see if this works or not. Let me clear this up. And now if I go on and remove this, you're gonna see this is unmounted. So this is how you implement all of the lifecycle methods with the help of functional components in React. Now the next question for this round is one that is asked a million times in these web developer interviews. Are you ready? Drum roll please. Ways to center a div. Yes, this was the question that was asked in this round. And I was never more prepared for a question than this question. I was waiting my whole life for the interviewer to ask me this question. So let's go on and find out how many ways does roadside coder know to center a div. So I'm gonna go and open the HTML file, and over here, let's say inside of this body, I'm gonna have a div, and inside of the div, I'm gonna just put this h1 tag. Let's go inside of the style.css. You know what? I'm gonna put it right over here. I'm just gonna say div, and let me just give it some background color for now. Let's give this color probably. So for body, I'm gonna do is this width to be 100% and height to be 100%. Okay, cool. Now to center this div, 3 ways came to my mind. First one was by using top and left. So let's say top 50% and left 50%. Oh, and I'm gonna give position to be absolute. Now to align it back to the center, I'm gonna say transform translate, and I'm going to translate back by 50% on both axes. Oh, I mean minus 50%. Yeah. So second method to center a div will be by using flexbox. So I'm gonna remove all of this thing, and I'm gonna give it display flex. Yeah. Now, since we have given it display flex, I'm gonna give it justify content to center. So it gets centered at the middle, horizontally centered, and then I'm gonna vertically center by align items center. And this doesn't work because, okay, height, I'm gonna give 100 VH. Yep, this works. Great, let's jump on to the third method. And the third method is by using display grid. So instead of display flex, I'm just gonna add display grid, and it's not going to make any difference. So if I comment this out, oh, okay, but we're not concerned with that. So yeah, so we have centered it successfully. Obviously there can be more methods to center a div, but like these 3 were the methods that I could remember at that time. Now the next question for this round was, what is CSS Box Model? So let's find out. So since we have created this div already, I'm gonna reuse this. So this div has, let's give this div some width of, I don't know, 200 pixel. Oh, 400. This is fine. Yeah, 400 pixels. I'm gonna give it some border. So border, let's say 5 pixel solid black. Okay, I'm gonna give it some padding of 20 pixels and some margin of 20 pixel. Okay, so these 4 are the properties which combine to make the CSS box model. Every single HTML element has these 4 properties, right? So these 4 combine to form a box element. Let me show you that visually. So if you go to inspect, and this div is selected, right? Yeah, this div. So over here in the computed, you can see these 4 properties. So we gave it some width of 400 pixels, some padding of 20 pixels, some border of 5 pixels, and some margin of 20 pixels. So these 4 combine to form the box model for our HTML element. Now the fourth and the last question of this round was to implement a debounce function in React.js. So what is debounce? Let's go and see. So if I go on and open flipkart.com. So Flipkart is an e-commerce website. So inside of here, you can see there's a search bar, right? If you go on and search let's say DSLR camera. Did you notice something? When I stopped typing, after a few milliseconds, the result came. So if I, let's say, remove this, just when I stop typing, only then these results get updated. So let's say if I type hats, see, or let's say jackets. After I'm done writing jackets, it fetches all of these results. So this is called debouncing. In debouncing, when we write something inside the search, only after we have stopped typing, only after a few milliseconds or however time which we want to keep inside the debounce, it's going to perform some action. I'm going to close this now and I'm going to create an input tag here. And whenever we type inside this input tag, I want only after 1 second when I'm stopped typing, it should print in the console. So I'm gonna go over here and create const my debounce. Now this debounce take two things. First thing is going to be a function or a callback, and second thing is going to be a delay. So I'm gonna first set a timer over here, let timer, and then I'm going to return a function which is the debounced version of the function that we got. And inside of this, first of all, I'm gonna check if there's something inside of the timer. If the timer is still running, then clear timeout, and I'm gonna provide the timer ID. And after this, I'm gonna set the timer. If there's nothing inside the timer, then I'm gonna say set timeout. And this set timeout will have the D that we provided, the delay. And inside the set timeout, we're gonna run that function. So callback with the arguments, args, just like this. So let me explain this once again. So let's say if we are typing something inside this input box and it comes over here. So a timer is initialized, right? So over here, it's gonna check if the timer is initialized or not. So it was not initialized. So it created this set timeout of let's say 1 second. So it has created this set timeout of 1 second that it's going to only run after 1 second. But 1 second didn't get completed. And user again typed anything inside of the input box. Then again this will run and it's gonna check if there's something inside the timer, then clear it out. And this is going to run until user stops the typing, and then this set timeout will get to run completely. So let's test this out. I'm gonna create a const handle change and my debounce, and this will take two things. First is going to be a function, another will be the delay. So I'm gonna give 1 second of delay. So this debounce, I'm just gonna say console log, and this will take an event.target.value. So this comes from here input. So I'm gonna say on change, and I'm gonna provide handle change. Yep, so this should work. Let's see. Let's clear this up. And if I'm typing anything, nothing happens. But when I stop, yes, it prints after 1 second. So this is what debounce is all about. So I'm typing anything over here. Yep, and we can provide it anytime that we like, 1 second, 2 second, 5 second, it's your choice. So this is how you create a polyfill for a debounce. So yeah, that was round 3 based on React.js and UI stuff. And round 4 was basically an HR plus cultural round. This round was more of a discussion on how I would react in different situations and approach problems and team dynamics, culture fit, etc. And that concludes all of the rounds for our interview. If you like this video, give this video a huge fat thumbs up and subscribe to the channel with bell notification turned on. And if you would like me to make more such interview videos, just let me know in the comment down below and share this video with your friends so that they can also get benefit from these questions.